Started now. Just to introduce myself, I'm Catherine George, president of the IB Society. On behalf of the IB department and the IB Society, I'd like to introduce Lew Nescott. He's coming here from the Marines in Afghanistan, where he spent just about a year. He's also a founding partner at TradeFlow 21, which is a local organization that assists U.S. companies in identifying commercial opportunities in the Middle East market. He also He established an atmospherics program and has received a citation from a Regional Command Southwest Assistant Chief of Staff for efforts that significantly and positively impacted the stability and security of the country of Afghanistan. Moderating our discussion today is Mr. Ray Anderson, General Manager and morning host of AM 1220's WQUN Radio. And also, just after the presentation, we will have some refreshments, so feel free to stay for that.
Thank you and welcome everybody. It's great to be here this afternoon to talk about something very relevant today, relevant 10 years ago, relevant 30 years ago, and that is Afghanistan, particularly the area of Helmand province. Mr. Nescott and I will be discussing for several minutes between each other many of his experiences, what TradeFlow has done in the region, what the prospects for business are in the region, also in terms of geopolitical questions, what is happening with our role in Afghanistan, the United States military, also economically. We're going to take your questions. They're coming up to us later via 3x5 cards, so please, if you do have a question or if something pops into your head, even if you've already asked a question on card, please ask for another one, and we'd be very glad to ask some of your questions as time permits. We'll be here for about 1 hour. Welcome, Lew Nescott.
Thank you, Ray.
It's great to have you here at Quinnipiac University. One of the things that's striking, I think, this week in particular, to take our experience in Afghanistan from October 7th, 2001, the day that we invaded the Taliban-led government in Afghanistan, to today, is the fact that we're still there. Mm-hmm. So if you could describe and sort of take us back 10 years and then bring us forward 10 years, why we've been in Afghanistan as long as we have, and initially on October 7th of 2001, why were we there in the first place?
You know, that's, I think most people recognize the fact that at the time of the invasion, it was really a two-front war. The effort going into Iraq, which has cost us in upwards, I think, over $800 million, I'm sorry, $1 billion, and the loss of life as well. So we were fighting a two-front war. And for a time, Afghanistan was stable. There was hope in something called the federal government or the national government in Kabul. That said, resources were strained to the point that the Taliban was able to reassert themselves in certain parts of the country, to be disruptive enough, so much so that it might, and this is just my opinion, have accelerated the drawdown in Iraq. Probably, there was discussion, my guess is maybe 2006, 2007, as early as that date, to try and figure out what to do with Afghanistan, because that's when the South really came under Taliban influence again. If you can't stabilize southern Afghanistan, you're going to have a problem in Afghanistan as a whole, and that, of course, has implications for the rest of the world.
And that, of course, is Helmand province, which we'll discuss in detail a little bit later on. Now, this has been a 10-year involvement for us, but we should also take our audience and our students back 30 years to 1979, because what's unique about Afghanistan, as you've pointed out, is there has been a foreign occupier, if you will, or a foreign military force there since the Soviet Union invaded in 1979.
I mean, Afghanistan, what you have to understand, and I think you can understand this simply from public sources, is that it has its own way of doing business. You know, you've heard, or maybe you haven't heard, the fact that it is an extremely tribal place, which governs itself according to, at least in the South, with the Pashtuns, which are the majority ethnic group. I think they compose around 40-some% of the country, the Pashtunwali Code. That said, there was a time in the early 60s when President Daoud experimented with progressive governance. And so I've looked at black and white photographs of Kabul where there are policemen directing traffic with white gloves and no sidearm. At one point, Parisian designers, fashion designers, looked at Kabul as a center of women's fashions, as possibly, you know, a springboard to increasing their market and fashion influence. You know, there are black and white photographs in the South where I was, which is still a pretty kinetic area, kinetic meaning combat operations are still active and going on there, where the president would travel to take holiday and would go to the cinema, you know, or to enjoy the temperate climate. So it's not that long ago in the 60s that Afghanistan was living that way on their terms. But that changed. That changed with the Soviet Union trying to at least exert and project its power and influence over that region, installing a puppet government, and certainly the Soviet Union invasion, which lasted until the Mujahideen fighters drove out the Soviets, and this started a cycle of the Taliban taking power, following a civil war. It's been a cycle of war for 30 years. That's the point. You want to take away? That's really it. 30 years of war. You try to go to class or try to earn a living. If you're constantly having to navigate streets, if you're constantly having to navigate checkpoints, if you're worried or not you're going to be alive tomorrow or your building is going to be taken over or occupied, this is how the people have been living for 30 years. So.
Interestingly enough, when the Soviet Union invaded in 1979, right. Afghanistan was a theoretically stable environment at that time, a stable culture. Right. And by Afghani standards, fairly prosperous. The 60s and 70s were a time that experienced economic growth.
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, again, for people to be talking about, you know, Kabul becoming the designer capital of the world for women's fashions, or people considering the South as a great place to holiday, and not just within Afghanistan, but from without, it certainly has changed. Without a doubt, it was prosperous. Certainly, there were, I think, roughly 75% of people gainfully employed at that point in time were involved in agriculture. There was some industry. There was a cotton factory in the South, for example, but there were cooperative farms with schools, oranges, citrus. I don't know if you like pomegranates. I do. Fabulous pomegranates. I mean, they're climate wheat. But also, of course, poppy, which people sort of focus on. So yes, it was prosperous. It was agricultural based. They had cooperative farms. They had a progressive government that was daring to do some things that could be, I suppose, interpreted today as unbelievable when you look at the South in particular.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the breadbasket. You described earlier that it's, in a way, it was like Iowa.
Oh.
With wheat and pomegranates and fruit. And how was Afghanistan supplying the region as the breadbasket of that part of South Asia? Were the exports, the fruits, the vegetables, the grains, were they going all over the world to just a part of the world?
I mean, when people talk about the southern part where I was, where there are heavy combat operations still going on in the east, in the South, particularly what's called the Upper Helmand River Valley, most of the food, the Afghan people were able to feed themselves. And there were some exports in the region. You know, I can't answer the question about global exports, but I do know this. When you look at a country again, and it's not that long ago. I mean, give me a break. 30 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, when they could feed themselves and farm in relative peace. It's astounding. It really is.
At the taping of this interview, Lew, this week and in the last couple of weeks, right. 6 U.S. servicemen were killed after the discovery of a burned Quran.
Right.
And that, of course, is culturally very offensive. And there now are soldiers paying the price this week. So in the sense of cultural understanding, we've been there 10 years. How could the military allow the burning of a Quran or just having it burned with trash?
You know, I got to tell you that I don't dispute, obviously, the burning of the Quran. It's horrific. Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, it is an offense and an affront. And I'm sure there are many combatant commanders that would tell you this is precisely the last thing that we needed to have happen. But I would caution you on this. The protests are real. The outrage is certainly real, okay? But there's a large part of the country that's just fighting to survive, okay? How could it happen? You know, my view is that you have a lot of players on the field. You have the military, you have subcontractors and contractors, and Bagram Air Force Base, which is the main Air Force base in Kabul, which the Soviets built, has many people working on it. And so how it could happen is certainly the question that Lieutenant General Allen is going to have to answer. There's nothing to say other than it's tragic, it's sad, and I'm sure it's not the entire story of the last that we've heard about it.
Well, we're taking you back and forward, but we'll start to condense it into the last 30 years, and some of your questions will probably reflect that as well. We're going to talk about business, and we're going to talk about trade flow, we're going to talk about information gathering in just that particular region. But I'd like to talk about the Taliban first, so people have an understanding where they came from, how they became established, and they're still there, particularly in the Helmand province, and also the tribes. Describe to us the Taliban's ascent in the 1980s, where they came from, where they draw their strength, and what communities, particularly in Helmand province, where they have support, if they do have support.
When the Soviet Union pulled out and subsequently imploded in '91, there was a vacuum in Afghanistan, okay? And what you had were key players with their own interest. Massoud of the Northern Alliance. And in the south, you had a little-known cleric, Mullah Omar. And there were issues, people tried to negotiate a truce or a treaty. Let me give you an example. If I tried to cross the quad here to go to my car, if this was Afghanistan in, I don't know, 1984, 85, I might be stopped 2 or 3 times at various checkpoints. At most, I might be asked for some money, or at least I might be asked for some money. At most, I could be pulled aside, beaten, or executed. So, so the country was in a state of civil war. The Taliban, and the word talib means, learn or to teach. The Taliban brought a sense of order to the south. They brought a sense of order, essentially protected the south, and moved into Kandahar. So I think in the absence of rule of law and security, the Taliban stepped forward. And that really is how I think they gained a legitimate footing.
With support of warlords and most of the residents, say, of Kandahar or other cities in the region. I mean,
my understanding, your guess is as good as mine, but my understanding of the situation is that people that are desperate for security will go with the person that provides it. And the Taliban were very good at providing that security, simply the sheer numbers of the Taliban. So they set up their own checkpoints, but they did make sure that outside influences, at least in the south, did not encroach upon their turf and terrain. And certainly, this starts a cycle moving from security to ideology, where opportunity is seen for governance not only in the south, but power grabs across the country. It's human nature, and the Taliban did just that when they seized Kabul and the country. So, so that really is the story. People turned for law and order to the Taliban.
And after the Taliban established a foothold and established strength and power in the 1990s, they were supported by the government of Pakistan. Describe that relationship between Pakistan and government in Afghanistan, from the Taliban right now to Karzai's government, if you will?
I mean, again, you can get this stuff through open source material. It's fascinating, it's challenging, and if you can figure it out, let me know, because it really is, it's a shifting terrain. What you think is the case, when you dig a little bit further, isn't always the case. There are a number of players in Pakistan now. There's the intelligence agency that everybody talks about in Pakistan. There is certainly the government, and there's been a change in government and leadership recently. Cabinet players, ministers, and the Taliban operates primarily in a place called Quetta, Quetta City, which is, I think it's probably, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60, I'm guessing, kilometers south of Afghanistan. But the Quetta City Shura, or the QST, Quetta City, Quetta Shura Taliban, will in effect set the rules and the laws about how business is to be conducted with the blessing of the Pakistanis. Part of this is that, and again, this is alleged and it's talked about, that money to build the madrasas in Pakistan during the 80s and the 90s.
The religious schools.
The religious schools came from Saudi Arabia, of course, where the bin Ladens are from. So you have, you need to understand, the Soviets are the bad guys, that's how the West sees them. We arm the Mujahideen fighters, they chase the Soviets out, there's a void. You've heard this story, I'm sure you've heard this before. The whole world sort of turns their back and says, oh great, the Soviets are gone, fantastic. But you have munitions, men that are there. And now you have other influences coming into play. The madrasas, well-funded, well-appointed, the formation of the Taliban, the Talibs, who now view opportunity, political opportunity, and religious opportunity, if you will, in Afghanistan to provide law and order according to their understanding of law and order. So.
And I think many of us know about, or we assume we know all about the law and order and the administration of justice under the Taliban.
Right.
But the United States, and involvement of the United States, we're moving from the Soviet Union now to a different era. We believe 9/11 to be the start of our involvement in engagement in that region. And of course, subsequently our invasion on October 7th, less than a month later after the attacks from Al-Qaeda. But Al-Qaeda was already attacking. There was an attack on the World Trade Center in February of 1993. There was bombing in Sudan. There were nightclub bombings, Germany, Indonesia. So Al-Qaeda was already on the world watch list, and Osama bin Laden was already wanted internationally for terrorism. How attached was Al-Qaeda to the Taliban in the 90s? And sort of walk us from 9/11 and October 7th of 2001 to the present time, to the relationship of the contemporary Taliban to Al-Qaeda.
That's a great question. Clearly there was a close enough relationship to permit Al-Qaeda to function and in fact to set up their operations in southern Afghanistan. Again, this is public source material you can find online. There was a close relationship. The Al-Qaeda certainly echoed and supported the Taliban's political position, their religious position, and in return they were rewarded with the movement of men in arms to their camps, particularly in the south. So the relationship was very close. Now that has changed. What you should know, and again, public information, is that there is a push for reintegration of fighters into the government, okay? And Taliban fighters, local primarily, Afghans. Now, this has meant that there has been a change in Pakistan, some would argue, with the headquarters, if you will, at the Quetta Shura in Quetta City, which is now considering the possibility, they might be considering some possibility of reintegration, but that would mean that they would have to make a clear separation and delineate themselves from Al-Qaeda. So I think the relationship was close up to 9/11. I think it remained close for a few years, but I do think that over time, particularly all the way up to the present, there is a distinction to be made between al-Qaeda and the Taliban. I really do, because you would not even be able to conceive of reintegration of local fighters, I don't want to talk about foreign fighters yet, into something resembling the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, or the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, unless there was some change. So that's changed, and al-Qaeda, I think there is some separation, to answer your question.
That is an interesting point, because I think the perception among some commentators is that they're still linked in many ways. And al-Qaeda has links to other governments, which has been disputed actively. And you've just indicated, your walk through the last 20 years, is that there has been a distancing. And in a way, al-Qaeda is diffuse in Yemen, Pakistan, and other parts of the world. Yeah.
Our focus wasn't so much, this is the information operations part, and we can talk about that, I guess, in a little bit.
Yeah.
I'll wait for your lead. There is, al-Qaeda is dispersed. And so now the primary argument, or the fight with the Taliban, is their attempt to keep Afghanistan unstable, because obviously they want the biggest seat at the table. It doesn't help when you have charges of blatant corruption on the part of the Karzai government. Makes really our position in so many ways, in my view, in my opinion, almost untenable. And it just simply fuels and feeds the resentment towards something resembling a government in Kabul. And I think only strengthens the Taliban's hand and the narrative that they put out.
Now, Karzai has indicated that he will step down next year, 2 years from now. Is that next year?
That would be 2014.
2014, 2 years from now. So he will allow for the democratic process, which we've indicated strongly, we prefer as well, to go forward. But if you look back on his government and the evolving Afghanistan government order under Karzai since 2001 to now, how would you describe it? Is it very corrupt, a little corrupt? Is it dysfunctional? Is it undemocratic? Tell us about Karzai and his government.
How much time do you have?
Well, we thought we can stay here for the whole
No,
time.
These guys need to go on break. Come on.
No one has plans tonight.
Wait a minute, guys. This is where you speak up, right? Again, this is just one citizen's opinion, okay? Dysfunctional, I think, is a good word. All cap it, highlight it, add your 8 exclamation points, and whatever it is you do to pump up the word. The other is a cultural issue. As tempting as it is, and as difficult as it is, you can't really apply a Western model to Afghanistan. Now, that's nothing new. Okay, everybody says you can't apply a Western model. Of course, Afghans need to figure out how to live on their own terms. What people don't get is, can you even have something resembling, let's call it, a central or a federalist system? And just my opinion, I think Afghanistan is more suited to tribal law, Pashtunwali, civil disputes, even criminal disputes settled at the provincial or the tribal or the clan level, and that a federal government's role at this juncture might be more general security, securing the borders, providing relief in terms of humanitarian aid in the event of natural disasters, mitigating droughts and so forth, food delivery, those sorts of things. So on the one hand, it's dysfunctional because I think it's asked to do too much. And people in the South are hearing the word government. But if you talk to people in the South who still want to believe in government, they'll tell you, well, is it Kabul, or is it my district governor, or is it my mayor? I mean, you have people living in a village that'll try to talk to their mayor, or the equivalent of the Hamden Town Council, what we would call a shura, S-H-U-R-A, right, with elders. So it is a layered system. It's dysfunction and culture. It's not going to look like anything that people think it will look like or should look like.
We're going to take everyone now inside your work, and we're going to talk about information gathering and what this fascinating work that you've done over there in Helmand Province. You've been at Camp Leatherneck in Helmand Province, and it's quite an experience. Tell us about where Camp Leatherneck is and it doesn't appear to be close to Mount Carmel in terms of topography and in terms of demographics.
No, well, it certainly is not close to Mount Carmel. But it is in the south, in a sub-district called Nadia Lee, which is a major economic city in the south. And it is surrounded by desert, crushed stone, heat, humidity, all of it. And Camp Leatherneck is the primary British and U.S. Marine base which has responsibility for bringing security to the south. Now, Helmand Province is the largest province in Afghanistan. If you can, in my view, bring stability to Afghanistan, it has to start with Helmand Province, okay? So where I was on a Marine base with about 14,000 other Marines, 2,000 to 3,000 independent contractors, including maybe another 1,000, I'm guessing, local nationals who would, provision the base. And it was surrounded by blast walls that seemed like they would be a mile high in the sky, sand, dirt, gravel. It's a desert environment, and really nothing else around. You literally had to fly to other forward bases where there were more active operations to do your job.
So it's almost a moonscape.
It really is. I mean, you step out there. I think I commented to you, I don't know if these guys will remember or read about it, won't remember, certainly not, but will be able to shake their heads and say, yeah, Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb in the 40s, the U.S. government, while the Second World War was going on, had a secret base in New Mexico, right? And if you watch some of the more credible films, if there are any film fanatics here, there are these wonderful shots where the characters that have portrayed Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, walking out onto this desert landscape, to trailers and nothing around him. Well, that's what I felt like. We would work, the atmospherics program gathered atmospherics on what the Afghan citizens felt about their government, about good guys, about bad guys, which is military parlance for the enemy, all of those things. And we can talk more about how we gathered that information. Yeah. But I worked in a 40-foot container, and it was a moonscape. It really was, on the edge of Camp Leatherneck. And there was no one else around. When I left after 373 days in theater, my God, it was like development here in Mount Carmel. I mean, there was like a strip, but there was an MRAP yard, mine-resistant, vehicles. There were the CBs had moved in, so they occupied a compound. There was wire all over the place. There was a new DFAC or chow hall or calf that went up, so showers. So I didn't recognize the place.
So this big city just grew up.
It really did.
So seeing the U.S. military organize this and put it together so quickly, describe what you sound impressed, first of all, what we can do in that respect. But outside the walls, how could anyone from Camp Leatherneck move about the region that's still at war in relative safety? What was a day-to-day operation like in that location?
Most of the population, first of all, there's not much of a population around Leatherneck. The space was selected precisely because it's remote, okay? Most of the active combat operations in the attempt to win hearts and minds were more to what is called the Upper Helmand River Valley, particularly the north, places like Sangin, where I was for a while, Musa Kala, where we had a team. These are very active, very kinetic, dangerous areas. But you also tried to win hearts and minds as well. So around Leatherneck, per se, there wasn't much going on. And, you focus upon the task at hand, the mission at hand. And so that was our, if you will, our HQ, our headquarters, and we would get information from all Helmand Province, from some of the more stable areas to some of the more violent areas, that information would come to us primarily through cell phones, believe it or not. Great cell phone coverage in Helmand Province. But even that came under play because the Taliban would tax it. They would threaten to blow up cell phone towers, and that's another story. That's another story. So.
Wow. Well, but with this daily violence and this threat of danger and Humvees and exploding landmines, and there was always a sense that something could go wrong at any moment.
Not so much at Leatherneck, though there are always issues because you're provisioning from the outside. Trucks have to get through the gate. You have to feed people, stock stock the pits, all of those things, maintain, build roads. So where people could, they would hire local nationals. And yeah, there would be reports of suicide bombers. Occasionally an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, would pop over the wall, but it was nothing like a place like Sangin, again, where I was just for a couple weeks standing up a team, which was very kinetic, and there you felt, honestly, when you walked outside, because the HESCOs, which are these 12-foot burlap bags that are filled with sand and stone, and they're supposed to stop a round or a bullet, you felt like you were exposed, that, yeah, you were very exposed there. So,
wow. So sniper fire,
well,
explosions, grenades, what was the daily threat?
There was always a daily threat, but again, this is open source material. The Taliban will not attack you if you're armored in a patrol. They will try to attack you if they think it's right and they have the resources if you're on what's called a dismounted patrol. If I took half of this class and stuck 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of you guys in a Humvee, I'd need 2 Humvees for that. I'd want them to be comfortable. You may or may not hit an IED, but it's the dismounted patrols that you worried about a lot. I was based at Sangin. Our task was non-combat oriented, but more importantly, we would hire local nationals to get us the information. The military units, we worked with them to give them a read of the terrain, what it was like. These are the guys that paid the price. And they would go on dismounted patrol. So the Taliban would use tactics, techniques, procedures like small arms fire coupled maybe with an IED, command control wire, okay? Somebody actually pulls a wire, waits until she steps over it, or this half the class steps over, pull it, and you go back into the bushes. By the time everybody tries to figure out exactly where it came from and you egress the area, the person's long gone. But the idea is that the Marines, God bless them, who proudly serve there, are simply saying to the Afghan people, we absorb casualties, we absorb loss of life. We are going to keep going on patrols because we want you to understand that we need development here for your security and for our security back home. Without it, it's a recruiting ground and permits the reconstitution, and that's really the bottom line of cells and organizations who would reform in Afghanistan if the place fell apart in the South for one purpose and one purpose only: to organize, to train, and to plan attacks against the United States and her allies.
How did you gather information? If you have tribes, if you have a moonscape in a wide desert, if it would take you, I would imagine, hours and hours to get to locations. You had cell phones, but how would you gather information and know what was going on the ground?
Again, I have to keep telling you guys, public information. I'm sorry. I have a security clearance that I have to worry about, okay? And I don't want to jeopardize that, and I shouldn't jeopardize it. There is something called the Atmospherics Program Afghanistan. They actually advertise for people. So whether you have a military background or not, think about it. Check them out online. Atmospherics Program, AECOM, AECOM, is one of the large subcontractors for the U.S. military. Now, we would hire teams. We would look at a map and we would say, combatant commanders need information from these 5 or 2 or 3 areas, let's say, okay? And we would hire an atmospherics manager, which is typically somebody with a military background who understands the security considerations. We would hire an Afghan advisor who would be our interpreter, okay? And then we would hire Afghan subcontractors, local nationals, who would gather what's called green and white information. Again, there are 3 particular kinds of information I know of. Red information is intelligence. That is where the bad guys are, the enemy is, target them, you kill them. The green and white side information, I can't use the word intelligence. Did I just use that word? Oh, green and white information is public perceptions, which is, red information is not enough. I mean, combat operations really get you nowhere. They need to work in conjunction with the Hearts and Minds program. So our job, working with our atmospherics managers that we would send to these different command posts, they literally would hire people. And it could be 10, 15, 20 Afghan subcontractors or locals who were well placed in communities, and we would just ask them to go about their business, farming, whatever it is they did, and passively gather. This is the big thing. If we go to DeMille's tonight and somebody's talking about Afghanistan and, you know, they're watching whatever is on tonight and they're talking about Afghanistan or the government or, you know, the Hamden Legislative Committee or whatever, and we hear that information, that's passively gathered information. It's overheard information, information on a wall. That is invaluable because people will say that in a tea house, in a farm field, in a bar, you know, in the hallway when they think they're not being listened to. But they are. And that kind of information gives us a read of what the terrain is like. So combatant commander, this is a long, the combatant commanders will say, what did you find for me? Sir, this is what the public's feeling about you this week. You know, they really want to reintegrate. And they really want something resembling good governance, but they need a well, or they really need that hospital. Roger that. So we'll focus on humanitarian assistance in this area. Other areas less so. The Taliban may come in. You'll have checkpoints set up. You'll have, you know, occupation of a village. And we're talking then probably about combat operations.
Plus, when you're gathering that information, you have to verify your information and determine whether someone's telling the truth. There are double agents out there. There are people who may not have a complete command of the language.
Right.
You have to understand the culture.
Right.
You have to really listen.
Well, here's the thing, Ray. We tell combatant commanders, and this gets at first out of them, but they like what we do. We tell them, sir, we passively gather, which means individuals who belong at a tea house where they've been going for 30 years are there, except now they're listening carefully. Whether someone says something that's true or false is not the point. The point is that they said it. So it's irrelevant whether it's true or false. If I'm a combatant commander and I'm about to send this whole class, this whole unit out, you know, in about 2 hours to a village, I want to know, do they love me or hate me today? What are we going to encounter? And if the people in that village are really angry because they want, I don't know, something that's unreasonable or irrational, you know, they may want a brand new dam, you know, as high as their village that could provide power for the whole country, but they want it in their village. That's irrational, but that's what's reported. If somebody says something that's false, like the world is flat, or white is black, or black is white, you know, or I'm President Karzai, that's reported. It's reported. Because you're stepping into a terrain where you're saying, great, roger that. The people in this village think the world is flat.
You can tell us, though, that you're not President Karzai. So,
No.
okay, we can ascertain that. We're going to take a few of your questions that you've provided. We'll go through a few of those. I do have this interesting question about atmospherics. I mean, it sort of it sounds like a catchphrase. Tell us what atmospherics is.
Wow. I mean, there's two kinds. I mean, there's Dr. Mel, God rest her soul. There's the weather in the sky, all right, and then there's the atmosphere of a room. Now, there's the atmosphere in this room. I'm trying to read your faces, and I haven't a clue if this is a requirement or if you kind of want to be here or whatever. It's hard for me to do. I mean, you're a good group. I mean, I would really have trouble gathering an atmospheric on you. But we gather information on public perceptions, the atmosphere of a place. I want to get back really quick to the intelligence question. There's something called human intelligence, which is where you actually will have a source planted. I may hire this gentleman here to be my source, and we meet at a discrete place, and he provides me with information. I may trust him over time if enough of what he tells me is the case. This guy is a bad guy. This guy is a good guy. Trust this elder. Don't work with this elder. But atmospherics is unique because it has the uncanny ability when people let their guard down, again, to really say what they think. It doesn't have to be true, but I want to know what you're thinking. If I'm a commander and I'm about to negotiate with you, and you're the, please don't take this the wrong way, the elder of this village.
I thought I was.
Well, yeah, indeed you are. Indeed you are. That I want to know what you're thinking, and I want to know what your belief system is. I may not agree with it. I may think it's preposterous or ridiculous, but I want to know.
You have to get inside.
And that's what we do.
someone's
Yeah.
head. Well, we're going to take a few of your questions, which you gratefully submitted for Lew Nescott. And first of all, your time in the Marine Corps and your experience there. And you've transitioned. Here you're back in Hamden. You've established trade flow. You're promoting business in Afghanistan. So how did the Marine Corps interact with business for you?
Well, let me tell you something. I went to Afghanistan because I never served. I'm not a Marine. I never served. I never wore the uniform. And first of all, I got tired of getting all my news from CNN. Secondly of all, I enjoy other cultures and have a propensity for languages and have done some NGO work as well. I wanted to pay a tab to my country. There are two names I'm going to mention to you, Jared and Danny. I didn't know their last names, but they're two Marines that died. And I went to one of, I think, Jared's dignified transfer, and Danny had another service. Never met him. These are kids, 18, 19. Jared was admitted into the U.S. Naval Academy, but he enlisted. He wanted to first be, do his work that way, but they never made it. And so I went there to pay a tab, to pay a bill for the freedom I've enjoyed. Driven in part by guilt, I suppose, driven in part by what I would call now maybe even my own cowardice when I was 18 or 19 or feeling too comfortable. And I just looked in the mirror and I didn't like what was staring back at me. So, time to pay the bill. Trade Flow 21. In 2008, I was still working at Yale, and I formed a group called Trade Flow 21 with a former Marine who did some intel work, and another guy who was raised on a Marine base in Okinawa. His dad worked on the flight line for like 30 years, retrofitting special ops planes and helos. And we formed something called Trade Flow 21 because we had A, an abiding interest in the Middle East, and B, on the gut level, we knew that when people were working, they're probably not fighting. Now that's the gut level, okay? And we looked at the fact that Connecticut businesses are well positioned. It's a CEO state. It's a diverse economy. We have intellectual capital. We have Greenwich. A lot of iBanking and boutique firms are there. We have this wonderful industrial base in the north and south, spin-off industries that you don't even know about that are exporting globally of under 100 employees to all parts of the world, component parts, electrical, computer, you name it. Certainly aeronautics and transportation are huge. So we love Connecticut. We thought this is a great opportunity, A, to push Connecticut products over there, and B, the over there is the greater Middle East. And again, I commented to somebody before the session started that we get creative with cartography. See, Professor Ali, maybe moving from northern Africa to pretty much Southeast Asia, and we carve up the market. We estimate 400 to 500 million consumers at various levels of development. So certainly, if you look at the Gulf region, the Saudis, Qatar, however you want to pronounce it, Kuwait, even Bahrain, now it's going through the Arab Spring 2.0 or 3.0. All of those areas are well positioned, and they are building whole cities, strategic cities, economic cities. When you guys go home tonight, I don't know how many of you are, I don't know if you're all international business majors, get on a website called SAGIA, S-A-G-I-A, I believe. It's the Saudi Arabian General Investment Authority, and they talk about whole cities they're building along a product line, information technologies. So we felt that with the money, particularly around the Gulf, with certainly the heavy level of manufacturing and assembly in places like Egypt, and in the emerging economies, which you could include even Afghanistan, we felt that we could begin to promote Connecticut products here from over there. Final statement on this point. Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton gave an address last week, which included Tom Donahue, the president of the U.S. Chamber, and so forth, and she talked about economic statecraft. From now on, every single embassy in the United States will have a commercial officer whose job it is to really push and put the pedal to the metal to push American products into that particular region where that embassy is based. Economic statecraft. It's driven by jobs in this country and a concern for jobs and jobs over there as well. Her feeling is that, to paraphrase, that security, which is what trade flow is about, because it's not just about economics, but we have commerce as a tool, prosperity and security, the dividend. nation building, that's the dividend, that, that security is not only shaped on the battlefield, but on the factory floor and also through commerce.
We're going to take a few of your questions, and I will read these as you have written them. What is the prospect for business in Afghanistan? What industries could be most attractive?
You know, that's a great question. Anything agriculture related, and I would probably position my company, certainly keep it offshore, but certainly in the South, for example, there was a cotton factory. Not only is poppy grown in Afghanistan, and it feeds families. I mean, that's the tragedy. People have, you know, I'm not endorsing growing poppy, but we talked about the other products grown. So some industries you could look at would be food preparation, foodstuffs, canning, that kind of thing. But I also would look at information technologies, I guess. There is self-service in the South, if you could believe. Better self-service in the South than I get here sometimes. I mean, it's pretty wild, I got to tell you. But then again, there are other issues in the South which sometimes interrupt service. But I would look at certainly information technologies. That really will be a comer. If that country ever knows peace, Ray, IT I think is going to take off, but it's nowhere near, you know, it's nowhere near even taking off because of the war. So those are two areas.
And we'll talk about the war again a little bit more as we move along. In that respect, the question regarding the history of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Afghanistan has existed as a sovereign nation for over 2 centuries. The ratio of the population who are deemed as terrorists, in quotes, by the U.S. government is very small. You mentioned that U.S. troops are there for the security of the Afghan people and the security of the U.S. Considering the number of Afghan casualties and U.S. casualties compared to the casualties of 9/11, are we really in Afghanistan because of security? Also, please define security.
Sure. From the U.S. point of view, security is defined as not permitting the enemy to organize and plan and conduct attacks. That's our security consideration when we look at Afghanistan. Again, this is my opinion, okay? So I want to be very clear. My opinions today do not represent the point of view of any U.S. government agency, okay? You're absolutely right, whoever wrote that question. You know, that's part of the debate, almost too much debate and talk on the public airwaves in this country. It sort of skews the whole point of Afghanistan. Let me tell you a quick story, a real quick story. I talked about reintegration, okay? Reintegration is part of something called a drawdown. President Obama announced a drawdown, not to be confused with withdrawal, all right? So just stay with me here. That means you pull back American fighting forces and let Afghans, on their terms, take control for their own security. And it also means you work with local militias, you work with the Pashtun tribes and the various clans within those tribes, okay? I did this for 373 days, okay, gathering this information and kicking it to the commanders who needed it. When I left in August, and the president made his speech about drawdown, the response, the passively gathered information in mosques, in tea houses, in bazaars was, are you kidding me? You wanted me to stay with you, and I have. I'm trying to keep our village secure as a member of a local militia, or I'm trying to do business, and I want to believe, despite corruption, that this ISAF, International Security Assistance Force, backed government, however it manifests itself beyond Karzai in my district, in my town, might be able to put in a school or some water pumps in my village, whatever. But when that was announced, the tone of the atmospherics we were gathering was, I would say, borderline panic, if not outrage, because people saw that as withdrawal. You are abandoning me. You're leaving. See, this is what doesn't make it on CNN, okay? It really doesn't. If it bleeds, it leads. Well, it doesn't lead to have a farmer simply saying, wait a minute, or a former Mujahideen fighter who wants to lay down his weapon. Somebody saying, wait a minute, you guys are leaving, and will the Afghan security forces be able to protect my village? Are you leaving I would not hesitate. I think panic is an appropriate word. So what is our mission there? Are we helping? Yeah, I would say to the extent from the atmospherics I gathered, people at least wanted once in their lives to experience a season, a whole season when they could grow and plant and grow and plant again. And they haven't had that in 30 years. Combat operations, mines, you name it, going on around them, yet they still do business in Afghanistan. Farmers do, they take their products and process. So yeah, that was the key atmospheric I got. Please don't go. That's the reality, folks. That's what I saw in the South. We can argue about it, but that's really what I saw. And it's only the horrific issues that surface, whether it's Abu Ghraib in Iraq or the burning of the Quran, the holy book, which is just beyond. It's horrific. I have no words for it. It's just horrific. The fact is that there are other stories out there, and from what I saw in the South, people wanted us to stay. So,
now, to what degree does infrastructure and the shortcomings of infrastructure, lack of power, clean water, navigable roads, rail tracks, railroad sidings, how does that impede economic development and actually inward foreign direct investment? Good question.
Oh, it's a great question, and the answer is it does. Highlight it, capitalize it, because it does. I mean, that's obvious. If you don't have the infrastructure, how can you do business? You really can't. Now, here's the interesting thing about Afghanistan. The government, on some level, is going to have to, we're Americans. We don't like things to take time. We want it now, right? I mean, look at business. We still conduct business with quarterly reports that we don't always take long. That's my editorial comment. And so when it comes to the war in Afghanistan and beyond the war in Afghanistan, that's going to take time. My guess, 25, 30, 40 years for true economic development to come, but it's going to require security. All of those things are needed, but right now, even before you have those, you need roads that are navigable and secure to permit freedom of movement, where I'm not going to get shot or blown up, a school, because Afghans want education, and healthcare clinics. That's a start. If the government can narrow its focus in the next 2, 3, 4 years to those issues, the rest will come. I'll leave you with this thought. Has anyone here read a report that I think the Pentagon, the Soviets actually were doing this, right? The Pentagon released a report, I think, last year, estimating that the mineral wealth in Afghanistan is approaching or over $1 trillion. Huge. All right, that's that includes lithium for your cell phone, which, from what a geologist told me, we talked about this, includes, and I think in cases, uranium and other elements. But there is copper and silver, precious metals. I don't know if there's bauxite there, which is required for the production of aluminum. Think about it, $1 trillion. But people are trying to stay alive above ground. If that country can ever know enough peace, your rails will come, your roads will be paved. Just enough development. But folks, it's going to take time. But it has to be on Afghan terms, not ours.
We have only about 5 or 10 more minutes, so what I'll be doing is asking just a couple more questions, or submitting some excellent questions I could see. I apologize if I can't get to all of them tonight. There's so much to cover. This question I thought would take us in a different direction. Lew, if we can ask you, could you make a comment on gender inequality in the business area of Afghanistan? How are women participating in business? And is there any relevant change in gender equality that you've witnessed that has happened recently as it pertains to the business field?
Yes, but conditioned by security, okay? Again, this is, hey, I'm not criticizing, great question, whoever. If you're a great question, but understand something. You're writing as somebody here at Quinnipiac. My sense, all right, and my job was really to listen. My sense is that women are demanding education, they're demanding health care and economic opportunity, but on their terms, as Muslim women, not as you. For example, let me give you an example. Afghanistan has one of the highest maternal death rates. I think for every 100,000 kids that are born, 1,400 women die, all right? Part of that is because when you go to a clinic, if there's a male health caregiver there, the male family member will not permit his wife to be examined by a male doctor. It's part of the tradition and culture. So there is a push on the part of many women in Afghanistan for more women healthcare providers. They're not pushing to change the law, their law, not yours. They're not pushing to change the custom, how they choose to live and pray. Their way, not yours. So you need to be careful about that. So yes, there is change. But again, Ray, it's where there's progress, right outside there's instability. So you can have women attending trade schools in secure areas in the South, or preparatory schools for college. But 5, 10, 15, 20 kilometers outside of that area, highly unstable. There's progress, but it is geographically not where it needs to be.
You mentioned excellent cell phone coverage, dissemination of information, but the question that we received here is, in a country that maintains one of the worst rankings in regards to freedom of information, how does one disseminate information to the general public, and how does that pertain to disseminating business information?
You know, business information or political information, I really do think it's part of it. It's a technical problem. It really is. You want a business lead? They need probably in the South more commercial radio stations. Talk to me about radio, all right? Talk to me about increasing cell phone coverage, but there is still a war element here, the Taliban presence. Until there is some kind of treaty that is formed, this is my opinion, some treaty that is formed between the Taliban and the government, you're always going, from a business point of view, have to contend with that dimension of it. But certainly it isn't so much oppression as it is access to getting information out. Really. I mean, in some villages, tribal elders have a transistor and they're trying to get the BBC, and they can some nights. And there's also, radio cobble and other, but it's really a question of technology.
And Voice of America, does that have a presence?
Voice of America is there, but again, it's just simply a question of coverage.
Coverage, I see. We have a couple more questions before we wrap up this session with Lew Nescott today in Trade 21. What was your most memorable experience? If you go back and you think of all the bold, colored, not pastel experiences of your time in Afghanistan, what was really your most memorable moment?
Well, sunsets. I mean, it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It is like a moonscape, but when that sun sets, there's beauty. There's beauty in that. And Sangin, which is a very kinetic area. I went there to stand up a team for a time in June and a little bit in July. And there's a causeway or a waterway where the water is deep blue from the Helmand River. And kids were swimming in it. Laughing. Wow. So, it's those experiences. And the Marines at Christmas time, Marines Thanksgiving, kids from all over the country, Connecticut, everywhere, I think of that. Stays with me. And Danny and Jared,
It's bold.
Stay again? Yeah. So.
Now we have the future. And the last question for you, Lew, is about the youth, how the youth see the country's future, and also how you see the future.
Oh, man. Well, I can't answer the last question. It would be more hope than reality. But obviously my hope is stability on Afghan terms, and that the ISAF effort there, that I may live to see a significant withdrawal, assumption of security, and relative peace between the warlords, the narcotics dealers, the tribes, a multi-layered system that does permit at least enough stability so that the country can thrive on its own terms in terms of business, and yet meet the security considerations of our country and the security considerations of the Afghans as well. I mean, they're the ones, it's not just first of all, there's no carpet bombing, they're targeted strikes. You know how a lot of Afghans die? IEDs on a road. night letters. The Taliban will come and they'll occupy. They'll pick one or two guys that maybe were seen talking to ISAF commanders or working at a clinic run by the Provincial Reconstruction Team, CIA spy, take him out, torture him, and execute him. That's the reality, folks. Now, you know, just in terms of, you know, my hope, the stability and security, the young people there, if you want a key business fact takeaway, here's a key business fact for you. Let me see if I can get this right. There are 30 million, over 30, and these are old figures from the CIA World Fact Book, okay? Old figures. Hard to do a census in Afghanistan. 30 million people in Afghanistan. And the life expectancy is 49, but I think well over 50% are in the key, what we would call the key demographic of, say, you know, 18 to 20 years of age. So, if that country can ever know a cycle or season of relative peace on their terms, right? There are enough entrepreneurs out there. And you may find yourself 10, 15 years from now doing contracts to set up IT infrastructure in southern Afghanistan. I hope you do. I really hope you do. Or to work with a multi-global, you know, a global company that's setting up a foodstuffs production plant for not only moving goods throughout the country, but throughout the region. I mean, those are my hopes and dreams. Final footnote. Afghans are resilient, more resilient than I could ever hope to be. I don't know how you live through 30 years of war. I don't know how you farm through 30 years of war, figuring out, here's a new player in my village. ISAF, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, I don't know you. Are you from Iran? Are you from Pakistan? I don't know you. How you survive and how you farm and get your goods to market without getting yourself killed, and then negotiate in bazaars, which are open. You know, so that's the big takeaway. Business is being done in Afghanistan, but it's being done by the people in spite of the war. God help them if they ever know, pray, if they ever know once, I call it a cycle of peace, one whole season, all 4 seasons where there's relative peace, the country will thrive again, you know, so.
I'm sure everybody would like to know a little bit more about Trade Flow 21, and I'm sure there are resources that everyone in the room can exercise and learn more. Great.
Trade Flow 21, a proud member of the Hamden Chamber of Commerce, right? Yeah. Which is probably the best chamber in the state. We joined the Hamden Chamber. They're dynamic. It's a mixed community. Solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, all various sizes and business lines and so forth. Trade Flow 21 was founded in 2008 again. A couple of friends from Yale and I founded it. We're starting to get some consulting work lined up, but we have a mission to educate Connecticut companies. So if you get on our Facebook page, we're not going to pay you to like us, okay? But if you could get on our Facebook page, Trade Flow 21, 21st Centuries for Trade, check us out. If you like us, be great. We'll like you back, okay? So that's my shameless pitch. But we're very hopeful. I may be deploying again, but my partners are they'll keep the business running. And so we're very excited because we have over 500 subscribers who are potential clients to us here in Connecticut primarily. Think tanks, technology councils, political leaders at the highest level in Hartford, and of course businesses, startups. It's not about the big guys getting the contract in Dubai. There are small companies there that are making inroads. I'm talking 50 to 100, level employee companies, but they have the right product line. So call us. We'll work with you. We'll work with you on your dream. But that's what Trade Flow is about.
Okay. Right. We thank you all for your coming and also for your questions. This concludes our session. I'm sure there'll be a few minutes. We'd like to meet individually with Mr. Nescott and ask him a few questions. We welcome that. Lew Nescott, thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Appreciate it.
For coming to Quinnipiac University. That's it. Good night.